Good morning. Good morning. How are we doing this morning? Everybody good? We are glad you're here today and glad you made it. And guys, believe it or not, that whole announcement time was unscripted. I know it seemed like everything was on a tight schedule with a script, but no, we went off book today a little bit. And so we're glad you're here today. And how are we doing with Christmas? Everybody doing okay? Yeah, good. Okay. I hope you'll join us for Pack the Pantry. That is really important to us. It's something that we believe in because, again, food banks are depleted after the Christmas rush. We want to make sure they have food going into 2020. So be there on Saturday. And if you can join us for Christmas Eve, we'd love to have you be here for Christmas Eve and join us for that. For us, we've been getting in the Christmas spirit. And one of the things we did was we went to go see Frozen 2. How many of you have seen Frozen 2? Frozen 2 Electric Boogaloo is, I think, it was a working title. And so I remember we saw that the other day. It was great. And one of us in my family cried. One of us. And it wasn't me this time or ever. Marie was like snotty crying. Like it was beautiful. It did something to her soul. It was great. So we had a good time seeing that. I remember the first time we saw the first Frozen movie, we really weren't Disney people. We didn't know much about this stuff. And we had moved to Florida, and our kids were, at that point, they were 3 and 1. And we had some friends. We had just moved here, and they said, would you guys come over, and we're going to have a Frozen party? And we were like, yeah, that sounds like fun. And we thought there's going to be a lot of kids there, and we're going to watch Frozen together. And we got there, and our kids were the only kids there. And we were like, so did nobody else could make it, or what? And they were like, no, we only invited you guys. Yours are the only kids going to be here. And we were like, well, that's kind of weird. And they were like, yeah, we just needed the kids to have an excuse to watch Frozen together. And so we watched it. My kids were like mesmerized. Like they were it was just transfixed on this thing, on this screen. And they could not take it all in. It was just too good. And so from there, it just became this Disney thing, right? Like Disney became a part of our lives and it became part of like normal things in our stuff. Frozen really wasn't that important to us. It just was what we used apparently as emotional release around the holidays. But other movies became like really important to us, and so we started becoming Disney people. We went to Disney. We kept going to Disney. We got passes to Disney. We like stay involved at Disney, and so Disney was like everything. And now, if you have Disney Plus, anybody got Disney Plus? Yeah, you're living that dream. Now you're watching Disney Plus. Disney was like this big thing, and I remember we went to Disney. It was not that long ago. I can't remember how long ago it was. And we got to Magic Kingdom, and we're walking into the Magic Kingdom. And if you walk right to the middle, you'll see a big statue of Walt Disney. And he's standing there, and he's like right in the middle of everything. And we walked up to it, and Oliver, my son, he looks at me, he's like, Dad, who is that? And I said, well, that's Walt Disney. And he looks at it, and he's like, wow. He goes, do you think he ever heard about Disney World? I was like, you are brilliant, kid. No, I was really like, oh, this is what you get when you homeschool your kids. And he was like shocked. Like, what if these two things went together? Like, what if this Disney name, because we take the Disney name and we make it a separated thing, where it's an organization, it's a company, it's a stockholder, it's whatever it is. Disney's this big thing, but we forget it's actually a person too, right? We forget that it comes from a family, and there's other people with the name Disney, and there were like other people who've had this name and still have this name. We forget that this name represents a family and a people, and it represents a person, not just some big organization or some big place. And today I want to talk about a name that we get that we kind of almost forget that it starts with a person, because it becomes this nation and it becomes this big organization and government and all these things that we still talk about today, but we almost forget that it started with a person, that there was a person involved who was the first person named this, and from there it grew into a nation and into a people. So I want to look at this name today. We're in this series talking about Jesus' family tree. And so this family tree, we're not talking about your family tree or my family tree, but we're talking about Jesus' family tree. And we're going to spend some time looking at different characters. We've been doing this. We started last week looking at different characters in Jesus' lineage because they're fascinating. And in Matthew chapter 1, the very first gospel, the very first chapter, it's not the first gospel written, but it's the first gospel in the New Testament. That very first gospel, Matthew, he starts off with his gospel. His whole story of Jesus begins by telling us Jesus' lineage, tells us Jesus' heritage, which is really not that exciting. If you're you or you're me, we read that and it's like a bunch of weird names. It's a bunch of people that we don't know. We're not familiar with them. It doesn't mean anything to us. But if we were reading this in the Jewish context, Matthew is writing to Jews, those Jews would have read this in a way where it would have been so different. They would have read it with every name having a meaning. Every name would have had a story and would have had a purpose. It would have even had a time associated with it. If you pay attention to the Old Testament and even ancient Near East literature, what you'll find is that they don't use times. If you ever notice this, they don't put like in the year 1600 AD or BC or whatever. They don't say this in the Old Testament because what they do is they mark time by people. They mark time by people because people represent so much more. And these names represent so much more than just a single person. They represent something much bigger. Every name would have had a specific purpose. Today, we don't always have that with our names. Like our names don't always have specific purpose. We kind of miss out on what they are. My mom, for instance, her name, she comes from a family in like rural Oklahoma. And I don't know where this came from, but her brothers, she has 3 brothers. Their names are John and Steve and Joe, like just typical white dudes who live on a farm names. And her name is Colita. I don't know, like what happened? Like why she's not like Susie or Sally, like she is Colita. And we don't really know what Colita means, to be honest with you. We've heard different theories on it. The problem is some of them are good and some of them are not so good. What happened was her mother was reading a newspaper and saw the name Colita and thought, that's a pretty name. I'll name my daughter that. And she named her daughter Colita, and my mom, she has a lot of Hispanic students in the schools that she was teaching in Oklahoma and in Texas. And every time she would say her first name, Colita, they would giggle. Not a reassuring thing, guys. Doesn't make you feel great. And so she would ask them, what does that mean? And we got a couple different versions. And it could either mean like a ponytail, like a girl would wear a ponytail, or it could mean like a horse's tail, like a horse's rear end, or a horse's hind parts. Which is not what you want to name your daughter, I don't think. This is why you don't just name your kid something out of a newspaper. So our names, they're like fluid. They may not mean what we think they mean. They might be like this weird conglomerate of words, but really when it comes down to the names that we read in the Bible, they all have a specific meaning. And actually the meaning has a lot to do with who the person is. And they represent stories that are much bigger. And so as we go through Jesus' lineage, each name that we see is actually really important. Last week I read every single name. And for those of you who came back after last week, why are you here? I mean, you should have just been like, that was good enough. That guy read every name, and we quit going to church after that. That was the last thing we ever went to. And I understand. I don't blame you. I read every single name. I'm not going to do that to you today, but in Matthew chapter 1, just real quick, just the first 2 verses, this is what it says in Matthew chapter 1, the very beginning of that. This is where Matthew begins the whole story of Jesus. It starts with a record of the genealogy of Christ, of Jesus Christ. Now, Christ, just in case you're wondering, Christ is not Jesus' last name. It was not like that was his last name, like he was Jesus Smith, but he was Jesus Christ. Christ means Messiah. It's a term that's not like a name. It's actually like a title, and it means like Messiah. So he is Jesus, the chosen one, or Jesus, the Messiah. And so Jesus Christ, the son of David and the son of Abraham. David, we will get to because it's really important that he says David, then he says Abraham. We'll get to David in a couple weeks. Just sit tight. I know some of you are like, whoa, let me write that down now. I can't wait to be here for that. I'm just saying we will get there, okay? But David is actually listed first, which is kind of interesting, and then Abraham, the son of Abraham, the furthest back person. Now, last week we looked at Abraham, and if you want to go find that, it's on our website. You can find this whole thing about Abraham. Abraham is the father of the entire faith. Abraham is the first one that God chooses, and when God finds Abraham, he makes a promise to Abraham. He says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, but I'm also going to make you a blessing to everyone else. There's a promise made. You will be blessed, but you will bless others. This is the promise. I'm going to make you a nation. I'm going to make you great. I'm going to make you the beginning of this entire line that's going to lead all the way to Jesus. We're going to literally save the world through you, Abraham. You're going to be part of that. And he says, but I'm going to not just bless you that way. I'm going to make you a blessing. You will bless others. It's a big responsibility. He says to Abraham, you're going to do that. Now, what we know of Abraham is, if you've ever been to Sunday school, you know that Father Abraham, he had many sons. And many sons, they had Father Abraham. I'm one of them. So are you. So let's just praise the Lord. Right arm. When you want to praise the Lord, this is apparently what you do next. Just praising the Lord. What are you doing today? Praising the Lord. Because I'm one of them and so are you. Let me add in my left arm now. It's the Jesus version of Hokey Pokey. That's what that song is. So he actually, what's weird is, to be truthful, Abraham does not have many sons. We talked about this last week. He does not have that many sons. He has two sons. He has one who is named Isaac, and Isaac becomes his chosen son. It's the one that he kind of follows through with, and he's the one that will become the heir in the line of Jesus, because he has Isaac in his marriage with Sarah. But he has kind of a quasi-illegitimate son with a servant girl, and he has this woman. This woman has a son named Ishmael. Now, if you pay attention, Isaac is where the Christian line and really the entire Jewish line comes out of Isaac's family, but the entire Islamic line, all of Islam, comes out of Ishmael, the other son that Abraham had. Both religions and almost all religions trace themselves back to Abraham. So there's these two religions that are born out of Abraham. One is Isaac, who has this line of Judaism all the way to Christianity. The other is Ishmael. So what happens here is there's these two sons, but Abraham only has two sons. He doesn't have many sons. That's not going to happen for a while. Then he has his son, Isaac, and Isaac has a son, and his son he only has two sons as well. Isaac does not have that many kids. It's not like they're just populating like crazy. There's only two kids, and Isaac has two sons. That's who we're going to look at today. The next thing it says Abraham, in verse 2, was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Now, just real quick, that's why we sing our God is the Lion of Judah. That comes out of this man, Judah. He was called the Lion himself, and then God becomes his lion who protects him. We won't get into that today, but that's just why we sing that song. But before that, it says Jacob, who is the father of Judah. So Jacob is the son of Isaac. This is who we're going to kind of camp on today. Because if you remember, Abraham has Isaac and Ishmael. He takes Isaac up onto a mountain and almost kills his own son. He almost sacrifices his own son. And then God saves him. And then Isaac has his own son, Jacob. So if you want to follow along today, we're going to be back in the book of Genesis. And that's where this whole thing kind of takes place, okay? So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 25 is where we're going to start. If you're a person who has a Bible or a phone or whatever you want to do to follow along, you're welcome to. You don't have to. It'll be on the screens. But this is where it begins, is really we're going to, at the beginning of chapter 25, you see Abraham die. Then you see not a lot from Isaac. We don't see a whole lot of Isaac's story in here, mostly because I think Isaac was in like real intensive therapy for most of his life because of his dad trying to kill him on a mountain. Like, that does something to you. So I think he was in some kind of counseling for a while, and then we come out the other side and we see him now having his own sons, Jacob and Esau. So we're going to start in chapter 25, verse 19. And it says this is after Abraham passes away. It says, "This is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, and Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean." You guys remember these guys, right? Really important. Hold on to those. No, these aren't really that important names. But these do represent, again, where they're at and what's going on. Then it says, Isaac prayed on to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, which seems to be a theme in their family. And it says, the Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies, now, this is really great. The babies jostled each other within her. And she said, "Why is this happening to me?" I don't know which way she said it. Like, if I don't know, for you women who have been pregnant in this room, I'm not sure if she said it like, "Why is this happening to me?" Or like, "What is going on?" Like, I can't, everything hurts. You know, I have a feeling she's not like gentle about what's happening to me. Something bad is happening. They're jostling within her. They're fighting for position. And she's got to be thinking, like, if this is what life's like now with two kids and me, like, what is a road trip going to be like someday? when they have to sit in a back seat together. Like, how is this going to play? They can't find their footing. They can't find their position. So she has them jostling within. They're literally fighting for position within her. So she went to inquire of the Lord. And she probably wasn't super thrilled about it. She goes to talk to the Lord, and the Lord said to her, two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within your womb, within you will be separated. Two nations, first of all. Like, we had some friends when we lived in Virginia. We had some friends who were older than us, and they were kind of mentors for us. And they had three girls, three daughters, and which, God bless you. I mean, like, three girls already, and they were pregnant with their fourth girl. And this was back in the day a little bit, and they were pregnant with their fourth girl, and it was the day that her water broke with the fourth girl, and they went to the hospital, and the nurse said, the heartbeats sound great. And they were like, you said beats, like with a Z, if you will. I think it was beats. They're very urban. And they were like, you said beats, and they were like, yeah, both the babies are doing fine. They were like, you said both. And so they went from 3 girls to 5 girls. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a lot of weddings to pay for. I mean, yeah. Yeah, and that's a surprise. Now, imagine being told you don't just have 2 babies inside of you, you have 2 nations inside of you. 2 entire nations are inside of you. 2 nations will come out of this, and that's actually true. What will happen with these 2 are nations will be divided. And it says here, the last line of what God tells her is really interesting because he says, there's 2 nations in your womb, 2 peoples will come from within you and will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Now, we would assume the stronger would be the one who would probably be the one who's in charge here. Actually, what we're going to find is that's not totally true. But interestingly, it says the younger will serve the older will serve the younger. This is completely backwards from everything. In this day and age, and when you read any ancient Hebrew or literature, you'll find that the birthright was very important. And a father would bestow upon the youngest or the oldest son his birthright. And the birthright was saying, you get everything that I have. You get the money, you get the people, you get the land, you get all the things that I have. Those are yours. And the younger son will basically work for you the rest of his life. But you as the older son, you get everything that I have. This is a big deal. You also are really the one that carries on the family name. You're the one who's going to be the successor to this family. You're the one who's going to carry this blessing that we've been given. And in this case, think about how big this is, because they know that they're part of the line of Abraham who's been told, you will be a great nation, and you're going to be blessed, and you're going to bless others. The one who gets this birthright, this is a big deal. This is a mantle that they will carry. But God says, and he flips everything. He says, but the older is going to serve the younger. That's not how this is supposed to work. That's not how people do this. The older doesn't serve the younger. The younger serves the older. This is very backwards. God's setting up something really interesting here. And it says right here, it says after that, it says, when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb, and the first to come out was red. His whole body was like a hairy garment. Love that. It just came out like a baby Chewbacca. Oh, look at that. I mean, that's gross. That's real gross. Hairy garment. Like, the Bible doesn't hold back here. He was a woolly dude. So he comes out like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau, which means hairy. And not like hairy like the Prince or like the Connick Jr., like Harry, like, no, he's just a hairy dude. Like, his whole life, he was just called Harry. Again, not like the cute Harrison version, but just like he's Harry. That's how hairy he was, is they just called him Harry. So Harry comes out with a full beard, I would assume. I have a feeling he came out and he was like, Mom, get in the wheelchair, we're out of here. You know, like he was a full-grown man. So Harry comes out, Esau, and after this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. He comes out grasping the heel of his brother. Like seconds later, this second one is born, and he's pulling the leg of his brother. Now, there's a few reasons for this. It's very odd. I don't know if you've ever been in a delivery room. I don't know if this happens frequently. I don't think it does. He's holding on to the leg of his brother. Why is that? There's something going on here. Now, some people would believe that Jacob, the second son, is actually trying to pull his older brother back in so he can be the first one born. Or he's trying to attach himself to that firstborn to say, look, I'm just like him. I'm also a firstborn. I'm also Esau. I'm just like him. But it says that he was born holding the heel of his brother, so he was named Jacob. Now, Jacob means heel grabber. That's actually what it means. The name means holding a heel or grabbing a heel. They were very literal with their names. And because he was grabbing the heel of his brother. That's actually, just so you know, this is where we get the term pulling your leg, it's deceiving somebody. That's what this person's name means. Jacob doesn't just mean that he's a heel grabber. It's not just a cute name. It actually means that he's deceiving you. It's a deception. And this is where we get this whole term from, because Jacob is pulling the heel of his brother. Now, Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. So they have this moment where and just real quick, if we can diagnose the scene for a second, because this is a very important scene, first of all, theologically. There's a lot of argument about this scene, and you don't have to, we don't have to get into all of it. But really what happens here is God has said that this younger brother is going to become essentially the older brother. He's going to be served by the older brother. They're going to flip places. This heel grabber is going to be the one who is served by the older, stronger, hairier guy. He's going to serve this weaker, smaller, younger brother. This is backwards. In fact, there's so much confusion about this, because in Malachi and in other places in the Bible, it also shows up in Romans 9, there's a moment where it says that God says that he loved Jacob and he hated Esau, which is a theological sticking point for me. That's tricky. God says, I loved one, I hated the other. Yikes. So some people would say this is where we come into the idea, and we won't get into this heavy today, we come into this idea of like election, or who is chosen by God, who's not chosen by God, that God chooses you to see if you're going to be one that he's chosen to essentially go to heaven, somebody who's going to be saved or not. Now, I don't believe that's how this works. Because first of all, I believe if God were that person who were the kind who would just choose some and not choose others, and say it's up to me before you're even born who I'm choosing and who I don't, then why wouldn't God just flip the order of these two guys? Why wouldn't he just show up and be like, you know what? You're being born about 10 seconds apart, it seems. You're jostling for position. You know what would be easier is for me to just come along, because I'm all powerful, and just flip you guys around and make the younger one the older one. And I mean, nobody would know the difference. This is literally a sprint to the finish. This is a photo finish of whoever basically has a bigger nose is the one who's going to be the firstborn. Whoever can get out first. That's all this comes down to. It's not hard to do. And God does not do that. He leaves Jacob as the younger. He wants him to be the younger. He's going to choose Jacob to be the one who carries this line, but he chooses him to be the younger. I don't know if that gives you any hope or not, but it gives me a lot of hope. Because there are moments in my life, and maybe in your life, where you realize there are some things that have happened where you feel like you've been kind of, whether the word would be disadvantaged, or you've had some things happen where you've put yourself in a bad position, where you've put yourself not to be in a position where you've been chosen. Let's say it that way. I think it's fascinating at our church. We're called Restoration Church. And again, we started this church with that name on purpose. And it's fascinating to me how many people come to this church, and I still hear people talk about that they don't know that they belong in a church because they don't have their life together. I hear it all the time still. And we didn't call this restored church, like past tense. Like we're all good now, and so we go to church. And so we're a community now. No, this is like a process, right? This is a thing that we're all in the midst of, and we probably will never get to the end of. I think it's fascinating how people have this fear. We do a thing called Restoration Beginnings. If you haven't been to that yet, Restoration Beginnings is just a class where we kind of sit down, tell you a little about the church, and we learn about you. We kind of go through your personality and things you want to do, and maybe some ways you could serve in the church. And I remember when early on, this a couple years ago, there was a lady who was coming at the time. They've since moved away, and she was in our class, and she came to me after that, and she said, "You guys are talking to me about like serving in a church and like being a part of some things, and maybe helping out with things going on in church." And she goes, "You don't know my background. Like, you don't know my life. You don't know how bad it is. You don't know what I've done." And I was like, "Well, then would you tell me?" Because people also think that they shouldn't like tell you about it because I'm a pastor and somehow like I've never heard about life. And so I was like, "No, just tell me what happened. Like, what's going on?" And she was like, "Well," and so she starts telling me this whole thing of how she was young, how she got pregnant when she was very young, and how she was embarrassed by that because her family was not supportive of her church was not supportive of her, and so she had an abortion. And from the abortion, she felt just a lot of guilt and a lot of grief, and she didn't know what to do with that. And so she went on and she said, "I didn't want to be with like people. I didn't want to like do things normally. I didn't want to be with men because I was fearful of just what that had done to me. And so I started experimenting with women, and this whole big thing." And she was like, and here's the thing, like, I believe that God is changing my life. I believe that things are better than they've been before. I believe that I'm moving forward in my relationship with Jesus. And she said, "But I don't know that I could ever like help other people, ever." I said, "You don't think you could ever do that?" She said, "No, I mean, look at what I've done." And I was like, "Oh, sister, like, this is where God's put you maybe for a reason. Like maybe the things you've gone through are not just so he could choose you, but so that he could use you, so he could use the stories he's given you. He could use the pain you've been through. Here's what God tells his people is, I'm going to bless you so that you can be a blessing to others. How can you possibly understand how to bless others until you felt what blessing feels like first?" So he leaves Jacob as the second born. He doesn't change it. He says, you need to understand what this feels like. If I'm going to create a redemption plan for the world through you, you need to feel what it feels like to be redeemed first. Or else you'll never be able to show that to somebody else. So he leaves him as the second born. We're going to kind of fast forward a little bit through his story because what we're going to see of Jacob is he's going to be a guy who needs a lot of grace. He's going to get very confused about who he is. And we're going to kind of briefly skip through. We're not going to go into all of his story because there's so many things that are fascinating, but we're going to spend a little bit of time just walking through his redemption story here and the things that he goes through, because what we're finding here is that God is not so concerned about Jacob being a character in this massive story. He's interested in Jacob's character in this story. He's going to change Jacob's character within this story. He's interested in the character he's building in Jacob and the person that Jacob will be because of this story. Jacob doesn't start out as a great guy. He's a heel grabber. He's a deceiver. And what we see next is he just continues that. It gets worse. The next thing he does, he has lunch with his brother Esau, the hairy guy. He's out in the fields. He's doing his hairy guy thing, and he's like, I just imagine he's like a Sasquatch, just walking through the fields. Probably killing animals with bear's hands or something. I don't know. He might be fighting bears with his bare hands. I don't know what he does, but he's out there doing his thing. And Esau is this big hairy man who's making or killing things. And then Jacob's in the kitchen, just doing his kitchen thing. He's adorable. So he's doing his like little nailed it situation, and he's making his food and having some fun. And so Esau comes in, long story short, they have this conversation, and Esau sells his birthright to Jacob, to the younger one. He sells his birthright for a cup of soup. Now, Jacob must have been pretty good. It's good soup. But he trades the soup for his birthright, which is not a great thing. He literally hands it away. And so Jacob has gotten away with part one of his deception plan to become this blessed one, to get the blessing that God wants him to have. He's taken care of part one, but step two is to trick his dad. He has to talk his dad into this too, because his dad has to give him the blessing. He can't just take it from his brother. He has to get his dad to buy in. So if you skip to chapter 27, this is what's going to happen here. We're going to see that exact thing happen. So Isaac, we're going to read, just so you know, we're going to read like a lot of the verses here. I know you're like, I didn't come to church to read the Bible. Sorry. Today we're going to do that. I apologize. You'll read some of the Bible. Next time you won't have to. It says this, so when Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see. So he's getting older. He can't see well. He called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son. And his son says, here I am. Esau answers him, here, I'm right here. So the hairy guy shows up, and Isaac says, I am now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, so he's saying, like, I'm not sure when I'm going to die, so we need to go and be prepared. Now then, go get your weapons, your quiver, and your bow. Go out to the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food that I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. This does sound like a dad, doesn't it? Like, I don't know how much longer I got, but I'd really like a good meal. So if you can do something about that, that'd be cool. Like his kids are dealing with complicated emotions now. Like, Dad might die. And he's like, I just really would like some good food. Like a steak or something would be nice. Deal with it. So it says, now Rebekah, Rebekah, his wife, was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. This is kind of where we see kind of that stereotypical, like the little Jewish mom who's going to meddle in things. It's about to happen. And when Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, now this is Jacob, not Esau, you, the hairless guy, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for you and your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father for him to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. Remember, Rebekah's kind of in on this plan. God is the one that told Rebekah when she was pregnant, the younger is going to be served by the older. She knows the plan, but she's kind of meddling, to be honest here. And Jacob says to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother is a hairy man, and I'm a man with smooth skin. Like, he's Tom Selleck over there, and I'm like Michael Phelps. I'm an Olympic swimmer. I have to stay aerodynamic. It's very smooth. Oh man. Anyways, what if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him, and he would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. My mother said, and his mother said to him, my son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say and get them for me. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son, Jacob. So he's wearing his clothes, which are probably like way too big and probably oversized for him. And then it says, she also covered his hand and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins. This is a hairy dude. I mean, goat skins. Like, that's something serious is happening there. Just a real hairy guy. And she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. So he went to his father, and notice what happens here. He went to his father and said, my father. Yes, my son, he answered. Who is it? And notice what Jacob says here. Just pay attention to this. He's asking, who are you? What's your name? Who are you? And Jacob says to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. This is an important question. He's asking, who are you? And Jacob lies. Part of it is he's lying to his father, and I have a feeling part of him is lying to himself. He's been trying to be this older brother since the moment he was born. He's been wanting to take his place since the moment he became named a heel grabber. And now he's saying, no, I'm Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing. He wants this blessing. And Isaac asked his son, how did you find it so quickly, my son? And the Lord your God gave me success, he replies. He wants this blessing. This is the blessing that he so desperately wants. And he thinks, I can't get it if I'm Jacob, but I can get it if I'm Esau. I'll just have to pretend my way through this and get this blessing. Then Isaac says to Jacob, come near so I can touch you, my son, and know whether you're really my son Esau or not. Jacob went close to his father, who touched him, and said, the voice of the Lord is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. These goat skins are really working. He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, so he blessed him. And then he asked again, are you really my son Esau? He asks. I am, he replies. Again, he lies to become this other person. Because maybe if he's the other person, he doesn't have to be the youngest. Maybe if it's the other person, he doesn't have to go through the things he had to go through to be the secondborn. So he says, yes, I am. And what happens is essentially there's a prayer that's prayed here. Isaac blesses and gives the blessing, this Abrahamic blessing, this big blessing of we will now become a great nation and you're going to carry this family line. He gives this blessing to the younger son. He gives it to Jacob, the heel grabber. And it says in verse 30, if you kind of skip through that, it says in verse 30, after Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. Uh-oh. So Esau, the hairy guy, walks in. He prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, my father, sit up and have some of my game so that you may give me your blessing. And his father, Isaac, asked him, who are you? And he said, I'm your son, he answered, your firstborn, Esau. Dum, dum, dum. Like, this is bad. Everything comes together, and Isaac realizes he's been tricked this whole time. And Esau realizes that his younger brother, this heel grabber, has finally succeeded. And he's finally grabbed this heel, and he's taken what he thought was his. He's taken this birthright. Now, Jacob has to go on the run. Jacob leaves his home, leaves everything that he's done because he's in big trouble and because a big hairy man is going to kill him. And so he's running as fast as he can. He's literally getting his way away as fast as he can. He goes to a desert. He gets married. There's a bunch of things that happen in the meantime. We don't have time to go into this, but there's also a moment right after that where God has Jacob kind of like lay down, and he has him have this dream. If you remember, there's this thing called the Jacob's Ladder. There's a Jacob's Ladder scenario where this happens, and he lays down puts his head on a rock. He has this dream, and God has this reaffirmation to Jacob, and he makes a promise to Jacob where he says, I have blessed you, and you are blessed. You will now be this one who is blessed and will be a blessing to others. He promises him that. And there's kind of this reaffirmation. Now, that's a really interesting moment because if you look at it in John chapter 1, Jesus actually quotes that exact story back, which is kind of a fun little tie-in. We don't have time to get into all of that, but there is a moment where God kind of reaffirms him. And God tells him, you're going to be okay. You're going to be blessed. It's not going to be easy, but you are now the one that holds this blessing. But here's the thing. There's still this tension. There's a tension within Jacob, and there's a tension within his family and the people around him because, let's face it, he's not done a great job. He's going to need grace upon grace upon grace. He's a secondborn who's trying to act like a firstborn. He's trying to be somebody he's not and trying to erase the negative parts of who he is so that he can act like he's somebody he's not. He's been trying to get rid of this baggage of the things that he's lived through. He's been trying to get rid of this baggage since he was born, and it's still with him. Who he is still a part of what he's done is still a part of him. He can't get rid of it. And there comes this face-off, this moment where things are about to come to a head. It's kind of act 3 of his story, but what happens is Jacob's about to go meet Esau again after all these years. And Jacob has now, he's stolen Esau's birthright. He's taken everything from him. And he's about to go meet Esau. And it actually says that Esau had 400 men with him. This wasn't a surprise party. This was 400 men waiting to kill Jacob. And Jacob knows it. And Jacob goes to go meet his brother one more time. And right before that happens, there's a fascinating little interaction that tells us a lot about what Jacob has learned in this time. It says this in chapter 32. It starts in verse 22, in chapter 32. Verse 22, it says this, that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons. Notice there's 11 right now. There will be 12 sons by the time Jacob dies. Those are the 12 tribes of Israel. That's where that comes from. This nation is going to come through. This nation of Israel is going to come through Jacob. And it says his 11 sons, and he crossed the ford of Jabbok. Then, after he sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob has now sent every servant. He sent his wives. He sent his kids, everybody away from him. And it says right here, it says, so Jacob was left alone. Can you imagine that feeling of alone right now? This is the dark night of the soul. This is the moment where all the shame and the guilt, all the things that you think of. Have you ever had that meeting with that person that you've wronged? I don't know if you've ever had this. I've had this happen before. I know that I've wronged people. I've had meetings with them. I'll sit down with them and tell them, I'm so sorry for what I've done. But you know that feeling right before it? Have you ever had this feeling? Maybe it's in your family. Maybe it's with your friends. Maybe you're thinking about it as the holidays come up. You have that feeling that's like I don't know if I want to go into this. What's going to happen? And all those thoughts of all of your shame and all of your guilt and all the things that you feel start to like bubble up. And it all comes to the surface of like, oh, this is on me. And I've done something wrong. And he's left alone with that feeling. And what you would think is he would break down and cry. You would think that he would have this moment where it says like he got emotional and he had a come to Jesus moment. He knelt down and he prayed, whatever it would be. You would think that would be what happens. That's not what happens. The next thing that happens here, it says, instead of him breaking down and having a moment of prayer or something like that, it says, then a man showed up and wrestled with him until daybreak. Didn't see that coming, did you? A man shows up and just starts wrestling with him. Like, we don't know how this engaged. We don't know what happened. If he just came out of nowhere. We don't know if it was a surprise attack. We don't know if he came off the ropes and came down with an elbow. We don't know how the wrestling match began. But a man comes out of nowhere and starts wrestling with him. Now, in Hosea, this man is called an angel, and Jacob calls him a man here at the beginning of this story. But what we'll see is that this is something divine, something very divine that he's about to wrestle with. And he starts wrestling with this man until daybreak. It's a long wrestling match. This is a long time. They start this fight and they are now wrestling. And they're wrestling through the night. And it says that after that, it says, so this man wrestled with him till daybreak. And when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. So his hip was wrenched. You notice it says the man saw he could not overpower him. Now, that sounds crazy. I picture it a lot like The Princess Bride, where Andre the Giant has the man in black on his back, if you remember this scene. And he's like, what's going on? And the man in black's like holding on for dear life. It's Carrie Ells. He's like holding on for dear life. And then Andre the Giant says, I just want you to feel as though you're doing well. I feel like that's what's happening. Like this angel or God or whoever this is, some people would even say this is Jesus, is going like, Jacob, I just want you to feel as though you're doing well. I want you to feel like you're doing a good job here, kid. And they're wrestling, and neither one's really winning, but also neither one's really losing. And so it says that he touches his hip, and he actually hurts him. He physically hurts him. In fact, what we'll see after this story is that for the rest of Jacob's life, he walked with a limp. He walked with a limp because something had hurt him. There was a reminder of this moment for the rest of his life. Every time he stood up, every time he walked, everywhere he went, he was reminded of this moment of wrestling because he had this limp. He was hurt by something, and God had to hurt him to get this message through. And it says that he touched the socket of his hip, so his hip was wrenched by the man. And then it says, right after that, it says that the man said, let me go, then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. So the man says, I got to go. The sun's coming out. And Jacob replies, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What was the original thing that Jacob wanted so badly from his father? The blessing. And what did he have to tell his father to get the blessing? He had to say he was somebody else, didn't he? But notice he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. I still want that blessing. I still want to be in this plan of where I'm blessed and I will be a blessing to others. I still want this blessing. And he says, and so the man asks him a very telling question, just like his father did for the blessing. The man asks him, what is your name? What did his father ask him? Yeah, who are you? What's your name? His father asked him the same question to say, who are you for this blessing? And in the last one, he had to say he was Esau. And he lied about it, and he lied to himself. And this one, I think he's, for the first time maybe in his life, he's honest. And he's honest not just with the man, but he's honest with himself. And he says, his name is Jacob. I'm Jacob. I'm the heel grabber. I'm the guy who deceives people. I'm the second born. I'm the guy who's not as good as the other people. I'm the guy who hasn't had the perfect life. I'm the guy who hasn't had it all together. I'm the guy who didn't deserve to be in this position in the first place. I'm the guy who didn't deserve a birthright but was given one anyways. I'm the guy who was less than. I was the guy who was outcast. I was the guy who was marginalized. I'm that guy. That's who I am. I'm actually that guy. I'm not Esau. I'm Jacob. That's who I am. He has to be honest about it. And then it says, as he's finally honest and says who he is, the man says, no, your name will no longer be Jacob, but your name will be Israel. See, we've heard this name so many times that we've forgotten that Israel is not just a country or a nation or a government. It's not even just something we read about in the Old Testament. This began with a man, and it began with a man who was less than, a man who was not chosen, a man who went through terrible things and actually did terrible things, but God used him to be named Israel. To this day, Israel is a word in Hebrew that means one who wrestles or struggles with God. God named his people those who wrestle and those who struggle with God. For a fun fact, do you know what Islam means? Islam simply means one who submits to God. No questions asked. One who submits to God. Israel means one who struggles, who wrestles with God. His chosen people, God's chosen people, he says, I want you to wrestle with me. I want you to struggle with me. I want to struggle with your background. I want you to struggle with the things you've been through. I want you to wonder why I chose you. I want you to be like, no, I'm so unworthy of this, yet those will be my chosen people. The people who think they are less than, the people who are not good enough, people who are not chosen, those are my people. Those are my chosen people. That's what God chooses. He says, because you've struggled with, and notice who he says, it's not you struggle with a man or with men, but you struggled with God himself and with humans. And I'm going to guess you've struggled with yourself a lot too, Jacob. And you're finally honest about it. And now you've overcome. And this is the nation that I want. These are the people through this line that Jesus himself will come from, who will be marginalized, who will be outcast, who will be less than, and yet he is going to be the one that will save this world. I remember when I was first going into ministry, and I did not want to do ministry. For those of you that know me, you know being a pastor was my last resort at best. It was the last thing I wanted to do. My family were all pastors. Still are, most of them. My dad was a pastor, my mom was a pastor, my brother's a pastor. It was a family business, and I wanted nothing to do with it. And part of it was because I knew how messed up I was. I knew I was in a spot where I can't possibly lead other people into a relationship with Jesus because, do you know how much of a disaster I am? And when I was in college, I was really struggling with this. And I was going to school for marketing because I did not want to do ministry. And Marie had said very clearly she would not marry a pastor. And I had told God I will not be a pastor. And see, we both showed God. And so I was really struggling with this, really. And I had people come to me and say, maybe you should think about this. Have you ever thought about ministry? And people I really respect. And I would be like, yeah, I've thought about it. And no is my answer. I'm not doing it. I'm just out. And finally, one night, we kind of had a come to Jesus talk. And actually, Marie, of all people, was the one that told me, are you sure about this? Do you want to pray about this? And I spent 2 weeks just fasting and praying. And I will say I would walk this back section of our college. It was in Lake Wales, Florida. Lake Wales, if you've ever been there, it's a thriving metropolis. It has a Walmart. Guys, it's a super center, so it's legit. And they'll pierce your ears. You can get dog food. They have a gas station. It's a win-win-win. And I would walk this back section of just isolated no man's land in Lake Wales, and I would walk through that every day and pray. And I remember feeling like I was just wrestling with God and being like, I can't do this because I am so messed up. And I was reading this book at the time, this purpose book by A.W. Tozer, and it's a great book. And I was reading through this, and as I was reading it, there's this line that became a famous line from A.W. Tozer that said, "I don't believe that God can fully bless a man until he has hurt that man." And I don't love that latter part of the being hurt, but I see it, I get it. And I had to come to grips with this idea that maybe God could use me because of the things that have happened. In fact, in spite of the things that have happened, because here's the thing, if I can do it all on my own, that's just me doing well. If I need redemption, if I need grace, if I need blessing, that's something that I can't do for myself. And it proves not just that I can do things, it proves that God can do things that only he can do. For all of us, if you're in this room and there's things that you're looking back at your life and you're like, there's so many things that I have just messed up on over and over and over again, the good news is you're probably in the right place. You're probably in the right people. You're probably in the right, let me say not nation, let me say kingdom. These are God's people. This is his kingdom, and this is the people that he chooses. And he doesn't just choose you, he wants to use you. He wants to use that story. He wants to use those shortcomings. And for so many of us, I think we miss this. So if you're in this spot where you're like, I'm here and I don't really get it, but I'm wrestling with God, then good news. So are all of his people. And that's who he chooses. But if you're in a spot where you're like, I've needed grace so many times, well, that's great because he wants to bless you with that grace so that you can be a blessing to others and extend grace. You won't ever give grace until you've received it. If you're in a spot where you're like, no, I need redemption in my own life, yeah, you probably do, but you will understand redemption in your own life. And when you understand that, you will be able to give redemption to others. You might need things in your own life right now where you need somebody to and you may need God to bless the things that are happening in your life right now. And once he blesses that, he's going to bless you. Why? So that you can be a blessing to others. So today there might be things in your own life that you want to work through, that you want to talk through. There's a prayer room in the back over here, just in with that glass door. You're welcome to go back there. People will be back there praying with you. You're welcome to do that as we sing here as we close. If you want to pray after service as well, you're welcome to stick around as long as you'd like, and we'd love to pray with you. But this morning as we wrap up, I want this just to be a time with you and with God where you're doing some of this work and talking about what is the blessing that you've asked him so desperately for? What is the blessing that you're needing from him? What is the thing you're wrestling through with him? And then if you're in that spot where you're like, no, God, you've blessed me so many times and you've been so graceful to me, you've given me so much of this redemption in my own life, then who are the people who need it from you? Who are the people you can extend it to? Because now you're a part of this nation, you're a part of this kingdom, and this kingdom doesn't exist to be a blessing to itself. It exists to be a blessing to others. So if you would, let's stand together and let's pray as we sing together. Jesus, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for this time together. I thank you for this community of people that we come before you and we realize that there's brokenness in our lives. We realize there are bad things that have happened. We realize there's moments that we've been a secondborn. We've tried to act like a firstborn. We realize that we've hurt people or we've done things wrong. We realize that there have been things in our lives that haven't been perfect, and we've tried to act like they're all right. We've tried to act like they all come together. But at the end of the day, we have to realize that every one of us in some way or another, we're all Jacob. We're all heel grabbers. And I pray today, God, that you would make us understand that in our own lives first. And then as we look at that in our lives, as we look at the grace you've given us, the redemption you've given us, the blessing you've given us, would you remind us that we are here to do those things for others, to extend grace to others, to extend redemption to others, to extend blessing to others. We thank you for allowing us to be a part of your kingdom, for being allowed to be a part of your people, your chosen people. We thank you for your grace that covers us and allows us to be a part of that. Now may we extend that to others during this Christmas season, during this holiday time with family and with friends and with loved ones, God. Would you remind us of that we're a part of your redemption plan today. Pray you'd use us in the ways that you see fit. Praise things in your name. Amen.